is Monday. I am Jenna Wolf. He is the Hall of Famer Cris Carter. That is Nick Wright. We have a big Monday show for you today. Talking Lakers, is LeBron throwing his teammates under the bus? Because there's an executive who certainly thinks he is.
Anonymous.
An anonymous.
Western Conference
anonymous
executive.
One.
We've got it narrowed down. By the end of the show, we're figuring out who it is. My money's on Jeannie Buss.
Speaking of teams out west, the Warriors continue to slide, but we have to start with what happens when Brown becomes black and silver. Antonio Brown is now an Oakland Raider. It was this weekend's big NFL news. The Steelers sending their very disgruntled star wide receiver out west to the Raiders. In return, they received a third and a fifth round pick, and they're hoping a much quieter, calmer locker room. Brown certainly got his money. The Raiders gave him a new contract, $30 million guaranteed, and up to $54 million. All right, Cris Carter, I start with you. Turns out there were a few teams interested in Brown, but Oakland made the final deal. What was your reaction to all of this?
Well, Oakland's a tremendous winner. And just imagine if this had been John Gruden in his first year. Yeah. And just imagine what after coming out of the TV booth, tremendous expectations, 10-year guaranteed contract, well, reportedly. But we went through a year where we saw him give up good young players and trade them. Khalil Mack, trading him before the season to the Bears. Amari Cooper, during the season, trading him to the Dallas Cowboys. And then now you're going to go out, and I like the fact that Mike Mayock was involved in this, and I believe that Mike Mayock will be able to help their front office, because for a third-round pick and a fifth-round pick, I didn't think they were going to get a number one, because I knew there was too much baggage out there, and there's some other things out there about AB that other teams aren't going to want. I knew from the beginning he wanted a new contract, so that hurts his ability to be able to fetch a number one pick, because if you give them more compensation in draft, they give you less cash. If you give them less compensation in draft picks, then the team is more apt to give you more money. And this worked out for the Oakland Raiders. Tremendous trade for them, getting an elite player, playing in the prime of his career with an offense and an offensive-minded coach that was under a great deal of criticism as if he had forgotten football when he had gone to the TV booth. So the Raiders have to be very, very happy about this trade. Pittsburgh Steelers, they lose up and down the board. Front office, they lose. The ownership, they lose. And the coaching staff loses. And one day, they're going to fire Mike Tomlin. And it's going to be this trade right here. And what happened in this year with AB, it will continually be brought up and discussed, because Mike Tomlin lost control of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, because he's gone, will he be able to gain control? But it's fairly obvious that he did lose control of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
On the Raiders side of things, see, when you say, what if this was a year ago? What if this was John Gruden's initial move? Last year, before the season, they traded a third and a fifth for Martavis Bryant and A.J. McCarron.
They said they got the name wrong when they sent the paper, over.
It wasn't supposed to be Martavis Bryant. They were trying to get AB then.
That's what
so think about that. Martavis Bryant and A.J. McCarron, same compensation, now got you Antonio Brown. There is no matter how critical of Gruden and the Raiders you've been, and we've been very critical on this show, this is, of course, a win. They get arguably the best receiver in football. They get him to a place he wanted to go to, which matters only because of his attitude. Right. We know he's going to work hard no matter what, but how much of a, quote, distraction, unquote, will he be? And for the Raiders, there is an element of the Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper trade to this in my eyes, which is if they don't get Kyler and if they don't get Haskins in this year's draft, they will be going with Derek Carr. And Gruden will need to determine if he wants to continue forward with Derek Carr after this year if they don't use one of those first-round picks on a quarterback. Keep in mind, in 2020, they still have an extra first-round pick in that year's draft because of the Khalil Mack trade. So the Raiders could potentially be in the quarterback business a year from now. But now they'll have fair information on Carr, because you weren't going to get fair information on Carr with the wide receiving core you had beforehand. And the other part of it is Mike Mayock, and I'm glad you brought him up, because I had real questions about, I know his ability to evaluate players because I've watched him do it for a decade plus, but there's a whole nother part of being a general manager and being a front office guy, which is one is the player evaluation, the other is the player transaction, the player contract, trade compensation. And for the Raiders to not be pushed into, listen, you got a first rounder for Amari Cooper. We want that first rounder for Antonio Brown. That's it. Clearly the Raiders held their ground.
Right.
They said, oh, you got a Friday deadline? Okay, we'll let that deadline pass. And once that deadline passed, the Raiders, I think, realized the Steelers are up against it.
Right.
They don't want that bonus to come due. And they were able to get Antonio Brown for the minimal possible compensation you could get a player of this caliber for that isn't, you know, facing some trial this offseason, that could be facing a year-long suspension. They got him for 35 cents on the dollar. It's a huge win for them.
So, you brought up Mike Tomlin, which is interesting, and what didn't work between Tomlin and AB. Now, Antonio Brown is going to have a very different coach, a very different personality, with probably a different stronghold on that Oakland Raiders team. How do you think those two are going to mash?
I don't have any clue. I mean, John Gruden hasn't really had a lot of high-profile players. You'll go back to his days in Oakland when he had Jerry Rice and Tim Brown. When Jerry came over from San Francisco and played with them, they had the outstanding season. Rich Gannon, MVP of the league. They put up tremendous numbers as a group. But I don't know what kind of offense they're going to run. I don't know if they're going to be 3 receivers. I don't know if the offensive line can hold up. I know how how he thrives. He thrives in a 3-receiver offense. He has to be able to play all up and down the lineup. You have to be able to hide him. He's also, you got to run some routes for him where he just gets the ball and he's able to get yards after the catch. So to me, I know what AB does. What is Gruden going to do? Don't know that. Their best receiver right now happens to be their tight end. Are they going to lose him in free agency? How much more football does Jordy Nelson have left in him? So I don't know what system John is going to. I know how AB thrives and how he's become the best receiver in the NFL.
That's the football part of it. And then the personalities part of it is, I watched John Gruden win a Super Bowl with Keyshawn Johnson, and that Super Bowl hangover honeymoon lasted all of 9 games the following season before Keyshawn got sent home, deactivated for the final 7 games of the season.
Yeah, I would say he won a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay, and Keyshawn was on the roster.
Oh, correct. I totally agree with that. I wasn't attributing Keyshawn as the main factor behind that Super Bowl. That was a defense-dominated team, but that was a Tampa Bay team that prior to Gruden getting there had given up 2 number 1s for Keyshawn. His first year there, they win a Super Bowl, all collectively, Derek Brooks, Warren Sapp, Lynch, all those guys. And then by the midway point of next season, go home, we'll keep paying you. We'd rather you be anywhere but here. Gruden doesn't have a long history that I'm aware of gelling with big-time personalities, particularly
or having a long leash, too.
Correct, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. Like, those Tampa teams had some big-time personalities on defense, but Gruden didn't seem to be meddling with that nearly as much. So, but that was also 18 years ago, 15 years ago. So how much has he evolved? How much has he changed? That first year in Oakland, he seemed to push a lot of the big-time personalities out the door. Was that a humbling moment for him? Or was this as simple as, even if it's not with his philosophy, see, wait, we can get this player for that? How could we possibly say no, especially when they had the cap space to give Antonio the contract he wanted?
Look, for us to think there's not going to be some dust-ups, there's going to be some dust-ups. There's going to be some problems. They're going to have some issues on the sideline. How they go forward, to me, is how does Gruden handle an elite player who draws a lot of attention, and how does AB handle the transition from what he was doing in Pittsburgh, where he was frequently late, marching to his own beat, doing things that no one on the staff knew what he was going to do, within the offense, doing some freelancing and getting away with it for a number of years. Who is he going to be when he shows up to the Oakland Raiders? Because typically when you see someone who has that type of personality, when they change, typically there's a change in attitude. Will he get back to being known as the hardest working guy for the Raiders? Because that's who he is also. But which guy shows up? That's going to be the question that he's going to have to answer.
During this football season at the trade deadline, the Houston Texans traded a 4th and a 7th for Demaryius Thomas. Right before last season, Jarvis Landry was traded for a 4th and a 7th. for Antonio Brown to be available for a third and a fifth, and for him to be available for a team. It's not like Buffalo was trading for him a third and a fifth where you're like, okay, we're getting him, but what version are we getting? This is one of his preferred destinations. He got his money. He's going to, they are looking for a face of the Oakland Raiders for the move to Vegas. He now is, I would say, head to head with Derek Carr, the only two realistic options for that, along with Gruden. This is a huge win for Oakland. For the Steelers, to double back on C's point from earlier, are they going to look back on, wait, how did the the three Bs era end? With Le'Veon Bell sitting out a year, with Antonio skipping the final week, and then us trading him for 35 cents on the dollar. That's how that
I didn't think they would win a championship. I said it for the last couple of years. I didn't think collectively all the things they had going on off the field, the selfishness and the me, look at me, that they have there on that team. I didn't think. So I thought it will definitely be they underperformed.
And there was this narrative that, well, the Steelers just do things differently. That's their family. Well, it turns out doing things differently, at least for them, did not work.